when we talk about a personality attribute, a quality that makes a good negotiator, I think it's not the most common word that people come up with, but it's the most universal that I've found in my experience. You know, just and how do you define it? People might define it different, but someone who is just a likable person, honest, genuine, sincere, trustworthy. It's like the Boy Scout code. Helpful, courteous, thrifty, brave, what all that stuff. But I think there's a lot of meat to that. There's a lot to consider. You want to be that kind of person that is a good person, and a good person is likable, and someone that doesn't scare people off or intimidate other people or quickly criticize other people. Is open and understanding. And I think those are important qualities.
Welcome to my NIL episode number 2. Today I have with me Gary Noesner, former FBI chief hostage negotiator, I should say, for 10 years, and also a 30-year career in the FBI. Also, author, Stalling for Time. Was upside down in the camera, but you get it. Stalling for Time. We'll make sure we put the link in the bottom so everyone can take a look at the book. Gary, thank you for taking some time to join me.
And hi, Colby. It's good to be with you today, and look forward to chatting.
Cool. So, yeah, I must say I have a story that I want to share with you. That when we connected initially, let me give a shout out to Ekta. Ekta, one of my acquaintances, told me I should connect with you on LinkedIn initially. You gave me some
She's
advice.
great.
You gave me some advice, and I asked you a question about how can I practice my negotiation skills. You probably get so many people outreaching me. I don't know if you remember the story. So I asked you a question, and you said, Kobe, everyone that you come in contact with is an opportunity for you to practice your negotiation skills. And you gave me the advice of Stephen Covey. Always seek to understand, right, then to be understood. Okay? So here's the story. I know we mentioned about this stuff doesn't work at home, right? So I told my wife this advice, and I was like, well, she's a teacher here in Atlanta. And I told her, well, since you have students, maybe you should seek to understand them first, try to get some understanding of them first and kind of see how that goes. Well, I didn't know if it landed well or not, but later, like last year, they brought in some speakers, and one of the pieces of advice that the speakers gave them was, maybe you should seek to understand your students first. And then she's like, oh yeah, I remember my husband. So I kind of got some brownie points there. So I think I credit that for you for giving me that advice.
Yeah, I mean, Colby put a nice term to it, but it's certainly been around for a long time. People appreciating the fact that you know, don't be in a rush to share with somebody the things that you think and the things that you want and your objectives, and take the time and invest in learning about the other person and what their experiences is, what they're going through, and you'll get the opportunity to share with them later on. Just be patient.
Yeah, and that brings up an excellent point, because one of the things that I struggle with, and I'm pretty sure my listeners, if they're actively, my audience, when they want to understand active listening skills, when I first started doing it, I was just listening. I was like, oh, say, when do I speak? Like, when do I say something? Like, when do I hop in here?
Yeah.
Do I just keep listening forever and ever and forever and ever? So at what point do you speak or try to understand what they're saying? Can you walk us through that process?
Well, I think it takes some practice so that you're not constantly interrupting the other person and responding too much. But, this thing like minimal encouragers, when you're just telling me a story about your wife, if I'm really trying to be very attentive, not only do we have good eye contact, I will say, oh, wow, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Wow. She liked it, whatever. It's just little ways we have as humans to let the other person know that, yeah, I'm following along. I'm listening to you. But there's a key element. You mentioned active listening, and I think the thing that a lot of people don't hear is the active part. We all can be silent and, hopefully listen to what is going on around us, what other people are saying. But if you really want to be an effective listener, you actively engage by asking open-ended questions, by, the basic premise of active listening skill is a restatement of content. The story about whatever it is that happened to you that just you've just relayed, whether it's getting a job or starting a new business or, a relationship issue with your spouse, whatever it might be. And the other part is how you feel about that, how that impacted you. So that'd be a reflection of feeling and a restatement of content. Remember those two things. And there's a lot of ways you can deliver on those 2 points, but those are the 2 essentials of active listening. So, it's not just what happened to us in life,
Mhm.
it's how we feel about it. We used to illustrate this uh, with 2 concentric circles, basically a donut. And we'd say as an FBI instructor, when you're responding to someone, there's 2 parts in your response. One is that center of the donut, the hole, as it were, that we call the story. The story of how you got here, what you're going on, what your experience, what's your problem, your dilemma, whatever it might be. And then the surrounding part is how they feel about it.
Mhm.
You know, uh, I might ask you, when was your last vacation? You may say, oh, I went to Paris. And I'm interested in the things that you saw and what you thought of the French and what did you like about the city or you didn't. But what I should really be attuned to is how'd you feel about it? Was there something about it that excited you and stimulated you, surprised you, disappointed you? All of those things are covered. The other graph we used to use, the mental graph, as it were, was the M&M candy. They developed it for the soldiers in World War II, and the reason it has that hard candy on the outside is so it wouldn't melt for the soldiers. So you think of the story as the chocolate, the inner part, and the feelings surrounding it are the candy, the coloring on the M&M candy that gives it this distinctive look. So, there's 2 parts. So when I'm responding to someone, whether it's a child or an adult, one of my grandkids, I try, I don't always succeed, but I try to address those 2 things, Poppy, we went to the zoo. Oh, you did. What did you like about it? Well, I really liked the elephants. Oh, really? Why did you like the elephants?
Mhm.
And it sounds like one of them blew his horn real loud and you almost jumped out of your shoes, and that was really exciting. Whatever it might be, when you do that and you get it right, I'm not telling you, Colby, that I understand you. I've just demonstrated. I've just shown you. I've proven it. And that has a power to it that is important for us all to remember. You always hear this, oh, I understand, I understand. No, no. Don't tell me you understand. Show me you understand.
Right.
And it's so much more powerful if we're able to do that than merely stating it.
Yeah, I love the fact that you said that like you tried because I've been in a situation since you've given me that exercise and I've attempted and I've done this so often. I find myself like I'm trying, but like I still find myself in my brain trying to shut it off. Like I'm ready to hop in, like because I've been so conditioned over the years, just hopping in and speaking. So like you said, it just takes time to just develop that skill set.
And I think it's a big issue for law enforcement officers that I train. And it was an issue for me early on because we're natural problem
Hmm.
solvers, we're taught identify a problem, solve the problem, and move on to the next problem. That's sort of the working guidance for a police officer. But it happens in our relationships too. And we men are pretty bad at it
Oh
overall.
yeah.
You know, our wives will have some issue that's important to them, and rather than take the time to listen, not to just what happened to them, but the impact it had on them, we're solving their problem already. We're saying, okay, here's what you need to do. You call so and so, and you do such and such, and boom, boom, boom. And I still get caught doing it from time to time. My wife will say, I'm not asking your
Hmm.
guidance. I just want you to appreciate how I feel about it. And it's so easy to forget that. And it takes some real practice and focus to be sure that we're not too readily trying to tell someone what to do or how to solve a problem. I found when I was a leader of a group of FBI people in the crisis negotiation unit, um, occasionally one of them would have a problem or issue, and they they'd come in and wanted to meet with me in my office, and I learned pretty quickly that I very rarely had to solve a problem, a specific problem.
Right.
What I really had to do was listen to their beef, their concern, sometimes they had a beef with me, hey, why did you do this? Or why did you say that? I wanted to go on that trip, but you said so and so instead, and you've got to take the time to listen to that and appreciate that. And at the end of the day, they don't expect for you to undo whatever mistake was made necessarily, but they want you to know about it. They want you to appreciate the fact that when you did or did not do something, it had some impact or effect on them. And, there is not a thing in the world with saying, I'm sorry, I didn't appreciate that. I had a lot going on. That's kind of a poor excuse. I should have known better, but um, I didn't remember that you had talked a long time ago about wanting to go on that particular trip. And, I apologize. I wish I'd remembered that. And I'll try to make it up to you in the future with, another assignment that you would find appealing. It's okay. We make mistakes, admit them. And people just want you to know, you know,
Right.
and
And I'll go back to what you said too about the whole the wife situation. That's one of my biggest things that I've always tried to do is solve problems. Like as soon as something comes up, I'm thinking of a solution. I'm thinking of a solution. So to your point, when you did give me that advice, one of the things that I did outside of that and kind of built upon that was I went to an organization that was a mental health organization, and they offered training in active listening skills. So I took that course. I think I mentioned this to you. I took that course, and what I learned, it's kind of similar. Don't and one of the things we couldn't do in that training was give advice. We just had to simply listen to people. So when my wife or whomever, my friends, they come to me and they speak to me, one of the things that I started to do was say, hey, do you want my advice or you just want me to listen? And so depending on what, because some people come to me and they say, Kobe, I do want your advice. So I started asking that question in the beginning to that individual. You think that's a good or bad thing to ask that?
well, you can deflect a little bit with asking your own question. Colby, how would you handle that? And you might say something like, "Well, I'm not sure, but it's not me dealing with it. It's you. How do you think you might respond? What are your options?" Help them work it through in their mind rather than you coming up with a quick solution.
Hmm.
I used to get irritated when I would have a question for my parents, and when I was school age, and my dad would say, "Well, go look it up," and I said, "Well, why don't you just tell me?" I wanted the quick solution. He said, "No, no, I want you to do some research, find out, formulate your own opinion," and that's a valuable lesson. People are going to react and respond better if we give them a chance to work through the problem. That's the whole underlying premise behind counseling is, but the feeling that, or the belief that people who express their concerns and their frustrations are then better able to deal with them. And I think there's a lot of truth to that in terms of what I've seen in life experience. So, yeah, we want to encourage those sorts of actions. If you solve every problem that comes to you, then nobody's going to make a decision about anything. And unfortunately, in the business community, there are some bosses who are so dictatorial and so
Hmm.
um, and get so angry and impatient with those who don't do what they want that people won't make any decisions. And they literally say, "Well, we'll see what he wants us to do," and it just slows down a whole organization because everything has to funnel up to this one person who feels a compelling need to make a decision on everything, to question everything else someone's done, and basically, it's just a poor way. It's the opposite of delegating and being confident. Now, if one of your subordinates makes a mistake, you can say, "Hey, Colby, I asked you to take care of this, and I appreciate that you took this on, but I was really hoping you would go about this in a little different way." Use it as a learning moment, but don't scold, don't discipline for the fact that somebody took an initiative and tried to do something. A lot of bosses do that, and that's unfortunate. It's a bad way. It's a bad management style, I believe.
All right. So if active listening is, I would say, I don't know if that's number one or number two, but I know you mentioned before, I've heard you say likability is one of the first things that makes the best. How does that fit within active listening?
Well, let's when we talk about a personality attribute, a quality that makes a good negotiator, I think it's not the most common word that people come up with, but it's the most universal that I've found in my experience. You know, just And how do you define it? People might define it different, but someone who is just a likable person, honest,
Yeah, man.
genuine, sincere. I always used to tell negotiators that, you're in a tense situation and you're trying to communicate with this person who's threatening to harm themselves or someone else. So you need to have the relationship with that person similar to if your best friend from across the country called you in the middle of the night and I lost my job and my wife's leaving me. You don't say, well, it's a bad time. I've got to work tomorrow morning and I got to get to bed. So let's talk later in the week. No, if you're a good friend, you're going to stay up on the phone
Right.
with your friend and listen to them and try to help them work through the challenges that they're facing. And you're going to try to be a good listener and be a supportive friend. Well, if you can do that with a stranger, um, you're probably going to be successful. There's no guarantee of success, but if you are successful, it's probably going to be because you've come across as sincere and genuine and patient and, yes, likable.
Yeah, I want to bring it to in all those skill sets and put it more in context. So, for instance, you've dealt with a lot of different, standoffs throughout your career. When you get to these situations, like David Koresh comes to mind, the Waco situation. Was your initial behavior or thought is I just need to get communication to understand him? What was your initial thought there to kind of build that trust? Because like in business, we do business with people we know, like, and trust, right? So in the same way,
Yeah, no,
speak to that a
well,
little bit.
my thought isn't that I understand him. My thought is I need to present myself, excuse me, in a manner that allows me to get to know him better. The way I respond, the way I come across. I think terrible things happen. People have been killed
Yeah.
and wounded. He's wounded. And, if I come in big bad FBI and say, you better surrender, we're going to come and kick your butt, no, that's not going to accomplish anything. I have to demonstrate a genuine interest in hearing his point of view and soliciting his feelings about what happened, knowing that in doing so, he's got to express some anger and some of it may even be directed at me. But, I always, maybe I'm lucky. I don't know. I always go into a situation thinking I'm going to be successful
Mhm.
because I'm confident that I am trying to be sincere and genuine and that's going to come across. I think if you go in there and you're, hey, David, this is Gary. I'm with the FBI. Let's be friends. I mean, it's just phony. It's fake. And it doesn't, you have to earn the right to be of influence. And so you have to invest the time in listening and trying to understand and asking questions. And sometimes you're going to get it wrong. You're going to say, well, it sounds to me that this is important to you. And he may say, no, no, that's not it at all. Okay, well, now I've learned something. He's corrected me and given me a more precise understanding of what it is that's important to him. And I can use that in subsequent conversations, So, you know, I think, there's a lot of business gurus in
Mhm.
negotiations. A lot of them have a lot of good stuff. And, I recommend everybody learn from everybody they can. But a lot of it's kind of prescriptive. A lot of people say, always do these
Yes,
things
I've
and
seen that.
follow these 8 steps. And here's the 3 steps to success. And always do this and never do that. And that's fine. That's all well and good. But that's not what I do. You know, my shtick is pretty simple. It's be a good listener, be sincere and genuine. And if you're going to be successful and gain cooperation, it's probably going to be because you've succeeded in coming across as non-threatening and as someone that someone else wants to cooperate and work with. It's not rocket science. It really.
Right, you mentioned that, but the thing that gets me, for instance, you say you go into these with a mindset, of course, I love the mindset always being successful. Like if I'm going into, in my case, these college kids are trying to get business deals with certain brands. Like they're going in there trying to construct a deal. But like we go in with that mentality, like this is my end goal, this is what I want to do. Has that essentially having that seed already planted ever gotten in the way of trying to negotiate? Because that could like deflect. I want this, but it kind of closes the ears from hearing the other person's side. I've seen that before in different.
Are you talking about you saying you have those objectives or the person that's coming to
I'm
you?
saying like me, say I'm going to do a deal and I want to get this
Well, that
deal.
there's nothing wrong with with having an objective.
Mhm.
I mean, I go my former life, when I go into a tense situation, I want the person to put their gun down and surrender
Right.
peacefully. And if they ask me what my goal is, I'll tell them that's my goal. It's no secret. I'm here to help resolve this situation. I don't want to see anybody else get
Mhm.
hurt, including you. And that's fine. You could be completely upfront about it. Now, is he going to have goals and objectives? Probably. And some of those are unachievable. You just can't do them. Give me a car and let me drive away and, into the sunset and live happily ever after. Well, it's not going to happen. But ultimately, they'll appreciate the fact that you're honest with them and say, there's a lot of things I can do. That I can't. But let's talk about how we can work together to minimize what's happened and to try to make sure this doesn't get any worse. Um, yeah, I just I think we can put too much pressure on ourselves, and then we perform. If our client says, I've got these big aspirations about all these sports deals I want to make and so forth, you say, well, it's a complex business, and uh, what sponsors want now may be a little different a month from now or 2 months from now. So we don't know. But the best we can do is have an honest conversation with them and see what they're looking at and how you might fulfill that need for them, you know, whatever that might be. And as long as you're realistic, you don't set your client up for disappointment, by over promising or creating expectations beyond what you can achieve. Um, I always go with the premise that you don't really control anything. The only thing you control is your own emotions. And hopefully, and many people don't do that. So, and also the other thing that's guided me, Colby, throughout my negotiation life has been, and I don't mean it in a religious context, but the serenity prayer. I know, uh, I recognize the things that I can change and things that I can't change, and I understand the difference.
Mhm.
Well, that's an important thing. There are things that I can do that I'm going to pursue and try to accomplish and do my level best. There's things that I can't do, and I'm not going to, you know, get into go down in depression because I can't get this. It may not be achievable, but do what you can. Create a challenge for yourself, but don't create expectations that you unrealistically you're just not going to meet. And you have to understand what control you have. At the end of the day, the other person you're dealing with, the person that's going to sign you on as an agent, the person that's going to buy your product, the person that you're trying to get to surrender in a bank robbery, they're in control of their ultimate decision. All you can do is try to influence it as positively as you can. If you go about that in a positive way, you're more likely than not to have success. But anybody who tells you you will always be successful if you do these things, I think is probably over promising.
Right. I agree. I agree.
I used to tell negotiators, the most frequent thing negotiators work is suicides. And, I once had a negotiator tell me he'd done like, I forget the number, he'd done 100 of them and nobody killed themselves. And I said, well, you're damn lucky.
Mhm.
And, of course, in his mind, he's the world's greatest
Right.
negotiator. And he was very, very good. But I said, if you do enough of these, you've done a lot, but if you keep doing them, somebody's going to kill themselves. And it won't be because you failed or you did anything wrong. It's just that they decided they wanted to die a little bit more than they wanted to live. You tried to prevent it. You tried to intervene. You tried to give them hope and reason to go on living. But at the end of the day, they decided not to. Is that a failure on your part? I mean, I don't think it is. It's not your responsibility that they pulled the trigger or jumped off the bridge. It was their decision.
Well, yeah, that's true. Everyone's in control of themselves. Speaking of that, you brought up that kind of leads segues into an article that you wrote that I recently saw about I think you wrote an article about first responder training, right? I saw on your website. And one of the things that in there, and because I was just reading this in a negotiation book, was the word concession popped out to me because I was just studying about concessions. And it mentioned specifically first responder training that you shouldn't make a concession, like with the individual inside. I'm thinking about from the context of business. like concession in business. So a concession in business, for instance, I want something. I was always told they want a reduced price, whatever. You make sure you get something back. But in the hostage negotiating, that's different, right? So I'm guessing concessions based on context.
It's a little more complex than that. I mean, the old adage in hostage negotiations was you never give something unless you get something in return, which is the business approach that
Hmm.
I think you're referring to. And that's typically good advice in what we call quid pro quo bargaining.
Hmm.
My back, I'll scratch your back. Yeah, I can lower the unit price, but then your order's going to have to be bigger. Whatever it might be, and there is a certain bit of give and take in that process. But 90% of what cops would actually do would be crisis intervention, and that is where the person had no realistic demand.
Right.
Just go away, cops, leave me alone. I'm going to kill her because she threatened to leave me and take my kids. Well, in those cases, he's not going to trade you his girlfriend for a hamburger. I
Right.
mean, it's not a quid pro quo bargain. It's a demonstration of an emotional hurt. So, in those cases, our approach is got to be a lot more empathic, and we try to create that relationship. But you don't have that power in a case like that. If he said, "I just need a cigarette, help me calm down," I might give him a cigarette.
Hmm.
Would I expect to get something back in that case? Probably not. But later on, if he were to ask me for some things, I would say, Colby, don't you remember earlier? Um, you asked for a cigarette and I gave you some cigarettes. You said you wanted this or that. You said that helicopter was flying overhead. I got the news media to take that helicopter away. You know, I'll use it later on to say, I have done things for you. And there's the rule of reciprocity that, Cialdini talks about,
Right.
that we need to do things in reciprocation for somebody that does something good for us. So if I, as the police negotiator or the business negotiator, you say, well, I've done this and I've done that, there are those clients who will take it as a sign of weakness. Well, I can keep asking for more and I keep asking for more. And if those are substantive things, you've probably made some pretty big mistakes. You keep, every time they ask you to lower your price, you lower your price. Well, why should their behavior change?
Right.
But if it's not a critical issue, financially or emotionally or safety wise, maybe a small concession might be a beneficial thing. It took me many years to, probably still not successful with some police officials. They've always heard that one thing: never give something unless you get something back in return.
Right.
Well, in some cases, it's like a lot of things. It depends. But I've worked cases where a demonstration of our good faith can help us a great deal, even if we don't immediately get something in return.
Right. And that brings up too, I know during the Waco siege, you got out 35 adults, including the 21 children. Was that a concession piece? That's how you were able to get them out?
There weren't, no, it wasn't strict bargaining. Early on, I would say that Koresh was trying to get some of the children out. There's a lot of different opinions as to why he was allowing some of the children to go. My opinion is that by letting some of the children out, that he could then ensure that their parents, unencumbered with child care inside, would now fight to the death for him.
Mhm.
And I think there's a lot of information that supports that contention. He never released any of his own biological children, but he would allow others to release. And I think that sort of speaks to that point that I just made. A few of the kids, he notionally said, if your local radio station plays recites a proverb from the Bible, that I'll let him go, and that's fine. Was he really trying to get this proverb recited over the radio? I don't think so. I think it was just his way of getting a little something or for the kids coming out. But it wasn't a hard bargain. There was no, well, we can't cite that uh, particular proverb. It's too problematic. We're gonna have to go with another one. We didn't get into that kind of
Right.
bargaining. If he had a very reasonable request that didn't harm our situation or weaken our position and we could get a kid out for it, well, why the heck wouldn't we do that?
Mhm.
You know, and we did. Um, but yeah, you've got to be careful. The bargaining thing has always been a real big issue. I mean, I agree. I mean, if you've got a plane loaded terrorists at LaGuardia, I mean, at Kennedy Airport tonight, and they want 500 prisoners released from jail, you know, we're not going to do it. We can talk about it, but we're not going to give them an indication that it's likely to happen. You know, we'll probably, in a case like that, be more prepared to go and intervene tactically. But we're going to continue to try to negotiate throughout and convince them not to become violent. But the prognosis becomes more challenging in certain kinds of cases.
Very. Speaking of negotiate and getting back into this, I saw one of your posts, and I don't remember the context. I just remember you posting, and being that it's kind of sports related, essentially, that involved the sports flair, the Brittany Griner situation. Um, Wanted to give your, have you ever been a part of any like that? I know FBI typically, they can correct me if I'm wrong, like international negotiations, or do you?
Oh,
Or you
absolutely.
do? Okay.
We're at the 120 kidnappings of American citizens. But the Griner case, which you're referring to, wasn't a kidnapping. It wasn't a kidnapping for money.
Hmm.
It was political detention. And they're very, very complicated. And there's, you know, typically, you know, with the Russians or somebody like that, there's going to have to be some concessions made to get this person out. The people are often either wrongfully detained or too harshly sentenced for a minimal crime, as was the case with her. But you know, I'd heard a bunch of things on LinkedIn about people being critical of that, and I thought I should put it in context, having worked so many of those cases. And I said, you know, we get out everybody we can every time we can. And yeah, there was a trade with this terrible arms dealer, but he'd already served, you know, what, 7 out of 10 years or
Yeah,
something like that. I don't know what it was. Plus, whose life is more valuable to me? It's the American citizens.
very.
But I hate to say this, but there was a lot of politically motivated racism involved in some of the criticism against the Biden administration. And you know, somebody said they didn't like his criteria, the president's criteria for bringing about a release. And I said, well, he had three criteria. She was an American, she was an American, and she was an American. You know, that's what our government tries to do, even if people have made, you know, bad decisions and maybe put themselves in a bad situation. I'm not saying she did, but that's that's immaterial. You know, the State Department has always tried, we in the FBI, saving life is the most important thing. And, you know, if the concessions are reasonable, um, I mean, the Israelis have released literally hundreds of terrorists for one airman or one Israeli soldier. And I don't see anybody on the political spectrum criticizing them.
Yeah.
Um, but you know, so politics gets mixed into all the stuff. For me, I rejoice in the fact that an innocent American citizen was released and you know, could rejoin her family, and you know, and that's a good thing any way you look at it.
Gary Noesner, it's been fun this conversation. I know you mentioned that you've talked to a lot of college kids, and hopefully a lot of college kids will get this. I know one of the things we both wish, because I've seen this too, that we should all work on our communication a lot more,
Yeah,
and get better at that. So, as you mentioned, same way when I started learning this too, and I was like, man, I wish I knew this when I was 23, even though I look like I'm probably 12 years old, right? But
yeah.
so what did I give you the last word? What are some things that you're going to leave the young audience with in regards to listening and communication that will help them in the future?
Well, if you want to be successful in life, you know, strive to be that genuine, reliable, sincere, authentic person, and be a good listener, being interested in other people's stories and acknowledge other points of view, whether you agree with them or not. Acknowledging them doesn't mean you agree with them,
Uh-huh.
but be respectful. And you know, and after you have heard what they have to say, you know, you can say, you know, well, I have a different take on it, and hopefully they'll return the courtesy and listen to what your take is. There are those who won't, but that's okay. You know, as long as you've you've demonstrated respectfulness and you've listened. And remember that listening is not a passive endeavor, it is active. And we demonstrate that we're listening by proving it through, paraphrasing what we've heard, putting in our words what I've just heard you say, and attaching to that description the emotional feelings that you've also demonstrated in the telling of that story: disappointment, confusion, elation, you name it, anything along the spectrum. And I think it's a pretty simple thing, but I think if people practice that and become good at it, it will have a positive impact on their lives and their success in life that they can't even envision at a young age. You just don't, you can't imagine. But again, you stick with the premise: if you're in business, government, doesn't matter. People want to work with people they like and they feel they can trust, and people who are honest and have integrity. You don't have to agree with them, but on every point. But overall, if you can do those things, you'll be successful in life, and more likely to have a good relationship with whoever you end up having a relationship with on a personal level.
And I couldn't agree more. A great place to end it. And I must say too, since you've told me that, a lot of people have come to me and said, "Hey, I love talking to you because you do listen, because it has changed me in regards to how I listen." And I find enjoyment in that as well, listening to others, getting to know people a lot better. So it has been very successful for me. So for anyone listening to this, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this podcast, and make sure you sign up for my first NIL. Again, this is episode number 2. We're going to be bringing you more episodes about all the skills needed to actually go out and make deals in the NIL space. And with that, I hope everyone enjoyed this episode, and we'll catch you with episode 3. Everyone take care.